My name is Mara Lang, and if I'm being honest, I didn't come back here to start over. I came back because there was nowhere else left to go. The day I arrived, the sky hung low heavy with that kind of pale gray light that makes everything look like a photograph from another lifetime. The road leading to the house was cracked and crooked, lined with brittle weeds and the ghosts of fences that hadn't been mended in years. My car coughed twice before dying in the gravel drive. It felt like even it was telling me, "You've gone as far as you can." The house stood there, leaning slightly, its windows fogged from the inside as if it had been holding its breath for too long. I remember standing in front of it with my hands trembling, clutching the keys my aunt had mailed me. She used to live here before she passed. I told myself it was temporary, a place to breathe, to figure things out. But the truth was, I didn't want to breathe. I wanted everything to stop spinning. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar, and something older dust, maybe. The floorboards complained with every step, as if the house disapproved of my intrusion. There were old photographs still hanging on the hallway wall, strangers smiling in sepia tones, their eyes too bright for how faded they were. I didn't recognize any of them, but somehow they felt like witnesses, watching me move through the rooms, watching me try not to fall apart again. I unpacked what little I had: 2 suitcases, a box of books, a framed photo I didn't look at anymore. The silence was unbearable. I turned on the radio static. I turned it off. My heartbeat filled the space instead. Night came earlier than I expected, the kind of darkness that feels like it's listening. I made tea just to have something to do with my hands. Outside, wind brushed against the windows like fingertips. That's when I first heard it, the faintest scratching at the door. At first, I thought it was the branches, or the house settling. But then it came again. A deliberate sound. A slow, careful scrape, then silence. I froze in the kitchen, mug halfway to my lips, breath caught in my throat. I don't know what made me walk toward the door. Maybe curiosity. Maybe loneliness. Maybe that strange pull we feel when something or someone sees us before we see it. When I opened the door, he was there. A dog. Large, dark, soaked from the drizzle. His fur was matted in places, one ear slightly torn, eyes the color of old amber. He didn't bark or growl. He just stood there, staring at me as though he'd been waiting. "Hey," I whispered. My voice sounded foreign, too soft. He didn't move. Didn't flinch. Just watched. Something in that gaze, calm, unwavering, ancient, made the air shift inside me. I should have closed the door, should have turned away, but instead, I stepped aside. He entered without hesitation, brushing past me like he already knew the house, knew me. He shook the rain from his coat, droplets catching the lamplight, and padded quietly into the living room. I didn't realize how empty the place had felt until he filled it. He circled once, lay down by the couch, and rested his head on his paws. No collar, no sound except his slow, steady breathing. I watched him for a long time, waiting for some sense of what to do. Call animal control? Find his owner? But the longer I stood there, the more I felt something loosen a knot in my chest that had been there for months. I whispered, "You can stay for the night." He opened one eye, just enough to look at me. Then he sighed a deep, human-sounding exhale and went back to sleep. I named him Rook the next morning. It just fit, like he'd always had that name, and I was the one catching up. He stayed close, always within sight. When I went to make coffee, he followed. When I sat by the window, he lay near my feet. When I walked to the back porch at dusk, he stood beside me, ears twitching to sounds I couldn't hear. It wasn't obedience, it was awareness. Like he was studying me, memorizing every move, every breath. Days blurred together, the world outside the fields barely existed. I liked it that way. Rook never demanded anything. He ate little, drank little, made no mess. He was watchful, patient. But sometimes, I'd turn and find his gaze fixed on me too focused, too knowing. It made something deep inside me tremble. Once, I woke to find him sitting by my bed. His head tilted, eyes glinting in the half-light. He didn't move when I opened my eyes. He just stared. It should have scared me, but it didn't. It felt like he was making sure I'd woken up, like he'd been guarding me through the night. Still, there was a strangeness in it, a weight. I started talking to him small things at first. "You like it here?" or "You hungry?" He'd respond with a flick of his ear, a blink, a soft huff. But the longer I talked, the more I felt like he was listening, really listening, not just hearing sounds, but understanding. And when I finally said it out loud, "He hurt me," Rook looked up sharply, eyes catching mine with a depth that stole the air from my lungs. I hadn't meant to say it. The words slipped out like something escaping, but once they were there, I couldn't take them back. "He hurt me." Those 3 words echoed against the walls, and Rook's body tensed slightly, his tail low but steady. Then he came closer, slow, deliberate, and rested his head against my knee. That was all. No sound, no movement, just that quiet, grounding weight. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there, staring at his dark fur, the steady rise and fall of his breath, and something inside me, that part that had been frozen solid, began to thaw. That night, I dreamed of the city again, of the apartment I left behind, of shouting behind closed doors, of glass breaking, of my own reflection looking back at me, small, frightened, unfamiliar. When I woke, the dream still clung to me like smoke. My throat was raw. Rook was lying at the foot of the bed, eyes half open, as if he'd been awake the whole time. He stood and came to me, pressed his nose to my hand. It was almost unbearable, that quiet comfort. Because he wasn't asking what was wrong, he already knew. The days grew longer. The wind softened. I started taking walks through the fields behind the house. Rook always trotted beside me, his pace matching mine perfectly. When I stopped, he stopped. When I turned, he turned, like we were connected by something invisible. Sometimes I caught my reflection in the old mirror near the hallway and barely recognized myself. The bruised circles under my eyes were fading. My shoulders didn't hunch so much. My voice when I spoke aloud didn't sound as hollow. Rook changed too. His coat gleamed in the sunlight, his eyes brighter, sharper, but there was still that intensity, that unspoken edge. He seemed to know when my thoughts darkened. Whenever my mind drifted to the things I didn't want to remember, the arguments, the isolation, the silence that used to fill my nights, he'd move closer. Sometimes blocking my way, sometimes pressing his weight gently against me until I stopped shaking. He knew my weak spots before I did. One afternoon, I sat on the porch, staring at the horizon where the fog met the trees. My tea had gone cold, untouched. I could feel that old restlessness crawling back under my skin. That urge to run, to disappear. Rook watched me from the steps, his gaze steady. "You wouldn't understand," I murmured. "You don't know what it's like to want to vanish." He stood up then, came to me, and pressed his head under my arm until I had no choice but to look at him. His eyes, that impossible, golden brown, seemed to hold something more than empathy. They held recognition. I laughed softly, bitterly. "You really think you can fix me?" He didn't move. I think that was the moment I realized he wasn't trying to fix me. He was holding up a mirror, showing me all the places I was still bleeding. That night, the storm came. The kind that makes the house feel alive, walls groaning, windows rattling, air thick with electricity. I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the rain hammering against the roof. Then I heard it again, the scratching. But it wasn't at the door this time. It was inside, somewhere near the hallway. I sat up, heart pounding. "Rook?" No sound. I stepped out of bed, my feet cold against the floorboards. The hallway was darker than usual. Shadows stretched long and trembling with every flash of lightning. Then I saw him, Rook, standing perfectly still by the front door, facing it, every muscle in his body tense, his ears forward, eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. Another flash. For a split second, I thought I saw a shape outside, tall, human. But when the light faded, there was nothing. Only the storm. I swallowed hard. "Rook, what is it?" He growled softly, low in his throat, not out of fear, but warning. Then, as if reassured by my voice, he stepped back and looked at me. I locked the door, even though I knew I already had. When I turned, he was still watching me. His eyes flicked from the door to me, slow, deliberate, like he wanted me to understand something. "I'm fine," I whispered, but my voice shook. He didn't believe me. I could see it. I fell asleep on the couch that night, wrapped in a blanket. Rook lying just beneath me. Every time thunder rolled through the valley, his ears twitched, but he didn't move. He stayed there until morning. When I opened my eyes, sunlight was streaming through the curtains. The storm had passed. The air smelled clean. Rook was gone. My chest tightened. I called his name once, twice. Nothing. Panic clawed its way up my throat. I ran outside, barefoot, scanning the yard. Then I saw him standing by the edge of the field, where the tall grass swayed in the morning breeze, watching something I couldn't see. "Rook!" I called. He turned his head slightly, as if to make sure I was there. Then, slowly, he walked back. That was the first time I realized how afraid I was of losing him. When he reached me, I knelt and wrapped my arms around his neck. His fur was damp, warm. He stood still, letting me hold him. I buried my face in his coat and whispered, "Don't ever disappear like that again." He exhaled that same deep sigh from the first night and leaned against me, the weight of him grounding me in a way I didn't know I needed. The days that followed blurred into something quieter, softer, but that strange undercurrent remained, that sense that Rook knew every corner of me, every fracture line. When I tried to ignore my grief, he'd nudge my hand until I met his eyes. When I lingered too long staring out the window, lost in thought, he'd rest his head on my knee, reminding me to stay here in this moment, not the one behind me. One evening, I sat by the fire, journal open in my lap. I'd been trying to write again to untangle the mess of memory and guilt that still lived in my chest, but every word felt wrong, forced. Rook lay beside the hearth, eyes half closed. "I don't even know what I'm trying to say," I murmured. He made a soft sound, a low rumble somewhere between a sigh and a hum. I smiled faintly. "You're not much help, you know." But he was, in ways words couldn't capture. When the fire burned low, I looked over and found him watching me again, that same steady, unsettling gaze. I reached out and brushed my fingers through his fur. "You're different," I whispered. "You know things you shouldn't." His tail thumped once against the rug, like when I'm about to cry or when I'm about to leave. He blinked slowly, as if agreeing. I leaned closer, my voice barely audible. "You know all my weak spots, don't you?" He didn't move, just watched. And in that stillness, that silent acknowledgement, I felt both exposed and safe all at once. When I went to bed that night, I left the door open. I didn't have to call him. He came on his own, curled up by the doorway like a sentinel. For the first time in months, I slept without dreaming. But just before sleep took me completely, I thought I heard a faint whisper of movement, the sound of paws shifting closer. And then, warmth. A quiet, steady presence beside my bed. I didn't open my eyes. I didn't need to. I knew it was Rook. Watching, guarding, waiting. As if he already understood that the war I was fighting wasn't outside these walls. It was inside me. And he somehow had already found every place I was still weak. And he was going to stay. When I woke, the light had already changed. It was soft, almost silver, the kind of morning light that makes everything look unreal, as if the world is still deciding whether to exist. For a few seconds, I didn't move. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the steady rhythm of breath that wasn't mine. Rook was still beside the bed. His chest rose and fell in a slow, patient cadence, his eyes half open, but not asleep, watching, always watching. I whispered, "You stayed." "It's Creasa Malona's tops is dud." His ear twitched, a quiet acknowledgement. Something inside me, something small and bruised, unclenched. I hadn't realized how used I'd become to waking up alone, the silence that came after, the emptiness that waited for me every morning. But now, there was another heartbeat in the room. A silent witness to my slow unraveling and whatever came after it. I sat up, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. "Come on," I murmured, "let's get some air." Outside, the grass was still wet with dew. Mist hung low over the fields, drifting in soft ribbons. Rook moved ahead of me, his dark shape gliding through the pale fog like a shadow with its own will. I followed his trail, the ground cold under my bare feet. He stopped near the fence line and looked back at me. I don't know why, but that gaze, sharp, certain, unwavering, always made me feel like he was testing me, asking without words, "Will you keep running? Or will you finally stand still?" I walked until I was beside him. He pressed his shoulder lightly against my leg. Just that, a quiet, grounding touch. "You really don't leave me alone, do you?" I said softly. He blinked once, as if to say no, as if leaving me was never even an option. We stood like that for a while, surrounded by nothing but birdsong and the distant hum of wind moving through the trees. It should have felt peaceful, but there was a strange pulse beneath it, an awareness I couldn't shake. I'd thought the loneliness was the hardest part of starting over, But now I understood that being seen, truly seen, could be just as terrifying. By the time we walked back, the sun had broken through the mist. I made coffee, toast, silence. Rook watched from the kitchen doorway, his head tilted slightly as if he were memorizing every small ritual. Sometimes I wondered if he already knew all of this, if, somehow, he had seen versions of me long before I'd met him, because everything about the way he looked at me felt familiar, like recognition. Days folded into each other. I tried writing again fragments of sentences, pieces of memory, phrases that felt too heavy to say aloud. Rook was always near, stretched out on the floor beside my desk or watching from the corner of the room. It became our rhythm, my words, his silence. But the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of him, of breathing, presence, understanding. I started to talk more, not to people, there weren't any people, just him. Sometimes it was small things. That old fence is going to fall soon. Or, I still dream about him, you know. Other times, it was more than that. I thought leaving would make me free, I said one night, sitting on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders. But all I did was trade one cage for another. Rook sat in front of me, ears perked toward my voice. His eyes caught the glow of the porch light, dark amber shot through with gold. I could almost see my reflection in them, warped and uncertain. I thought if I didn't talk about it, it would disappear. I laughed quietly, bitterly. But it's still there. Every word. Every look. Every time he made me feel small. Rook shifted closer. His breath warmed the skin of my hand. The memory came in flashes, hands gripping too tightly, doors closing too fast, words thrown like stones. I closed my eyes. I told myself I deserved it. Because I stayed. Something touched my knee. His paw firm, steady. I didn't know dogs could do that, not like this. Not like they understood what needed to be said without saying anything at all. I breathed in, out. My hand stopped shaking. Maybe he wasn't trying to comfort me. Maybe he was just reminding me I was still here. The nights were the hardest. The house would creak, the wind would find every crack in the walls, and my mind would start its quiet war again. Regret, blame, memory, over and over. Rook never slept deeply. I'd wake in the dark and find him standing at the window, watching the yard, as if guarding me from things I couldn't name. Once I whispered his name just to see if he'd turn. He did. His eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight, like twin lanterns burning low. "Why do you always look at me like that?" I murmured. "Like you already know what I'm thinking." He patted closer, silent, then lay down beside the bed. His nose brushed my hand. I could feel his breath, warm and steady. That's when I realized I wasn't afraid of him, not even a little. What I feared was how much I needed him. It scared me, the way he seemed to read every flicker of my emotion before I did. When I tried to act strong, he just watched me with those eyes that said, "Stop pretending." When I broke, he didn't move away. He was always there, too close, too patient, too knowing. One afternoon, I decided to test it. I took my keys, grabbed a jacket, and headed toward the car. Rook followed, tail low, uncertain. "No," I said firmly, "stay." And he froze at the edge of the porch, eyes narrowing. I could almost feel the tension in the air, a battle of wills that neither of us really wanted to win. "Stay, Rook." He didn't move as I backed toward the car. I started the engine, the sound breaking the quiet like a knife. He took one step forward, then another. "Rook, no." I slammed the car door. His body went rigid, but he stopped. I could see his reflection in the rearview mirror, a dark shape framed by sunlight, ears flattened, watching as I drove away. I told myself I just needed space, that it was healthy to leave for a while. But my chest tightened the farther I went down that cracked road. And by the time I reached the edge of town, I could feel panic rising fast, cold, inexplicable. I turned around. When I pulled back into the driveway, he was still there, sitting exactly where I'd left him. His eyes met mine through the windshield, and something inside me cracked open completely. I got out and dropped to my knees in the gravel. "I'm sorry," I whispered. He walked to me slowly, deliberately, and pressed his head against my chest. I felt the thud of his heartbeat against mine, steady, calm, forgiving. That night, I dreamed of the city again. But it wasn't the same dream. This time, I was walking away, and something was walking beside me. I didn't look back. When I woke, my pillow was damp with tears. Rook was lying at the foot of the bed, his eyes closed, his breathing deep. For once, I didn't feel afraid of the dream. It felt like a door closing softly behind me. The next few days, I noticed something shift between us. I no longer felt watched, I felt understood. When I sat by the window, he'd rest his chin on my knee and stare outside with me, as if he too was thinking about what came next. When I went out to the field, he'd run ahead and then wait, looking back, making sure I was following. He was still in every corner of my life, but it no longer felt like a cage. It felt like an echo, something that reminded me I wasn't invisible anymore. Still, there were moments. Moments when his eyes would darken, when something almost human flickered there. It wasn't menace, it was memory, recognition. One evening, while I was cleaning up after dinner, I dropped a glass. It shattered across the kitchen floor with a sound that made my whole body tense. My breath hitched. Rook was there in an instant, standing between me and the shards. His hackles raised, not at me but at something else, something invisible, lingering. I fell to my knees, trembling. "It's okay," I whispered, though my voice betrayed me. "It's just glass." He didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on me, unblinking, until I stopped shaking. Then, and only then, did he relax, pressing his head into my shoulder. And just like that, the fear dissolved. I don't know how long I sat there on the floor, surrounded by broken pieces and the sound of his breathing. But I remember thinking he wasn't protecting me from danger. He was protecting me from remembering it too vividly. That realization stayed with me. The following week, I began to write again. Really write. About the city. About him, not Rook, but the man I left behind. About all the ways I learned to shrink just to be loved. Rook lay nearby, sometimes glancing up when my pen slowed. When I finished a page that hurt too much, I'd stop and say, "That's enough." And somehow he seemed to understand. He'd get up, place his paw gently on my leg as if to say, "Breathe." And I would. Sometimes I'd read aloud to him. He never moved, never blinked, never looked away, just listened. "You're the only one who doesn't make me feel crazy," I told him once. "You don't tell me to get over it. You don't tell me I should forgive faster. You just stay." His ears flicked, tail thumping once. I smiled through the ache in my throat. "You really do know all my weak spots, don't you?" He looked up, eyes gleaming in the firelight. That night, I dreamed again. Not of the city this time, but of the field. I was walking barefoot through tall grass. Rook was beside me. The air felt clean, new. Ahead, the horizon glowed wide, open, endless. When I woke, I didn't cry. But that peace didn't last. One evening, near dusk, I took a walk down the old dirt path beyond the fence, farther than usual. Rook followed close, his pace easy but alert. The air was still, too still. Halfway down the trail, I heard a rustle in the brush. My pulse jumped. I froze. Rook growled low, quiet, protective. The sound rolled through the air like distant thunder. A shadow moved just beyond the trees. A deer, maybe. Or something else. Before I could react, Rook stepped in front of me, his body tense, tail straight, muscles rigid. "Rook," I whispered, "it's okay." But he didn't move. For a long moment, the world held its breath. Then the shape slipped away into the woods, soundless. When the silence returned, I felt a wave of trembling relief. I knelt, ran my hands through Rook's fur. "It's over," I murmured. "It's gone." He looked at me, not at the woods, not at the vanishing shape at me. And in that look, I realized something terrifying and beautiful. He wasn't afraid of the things outside. He was afraid of the things inside me, the ones that still whispered, "You're not safe." We walked home slowly. The sunset bled across the fields in streaks of orange and gold, and for the first time, I noticed how the color looked on his fur warm, almost holy. That night, I left the windows open. The air smelled like rain again. I fell asleep to the sound of it tapping softly against the glass. Rook's breathing steady beside me. Sometime in the night, I woke. The room was dark, the air thick and heavy. My chest ached, that familiar panic rising again, out of nowhere, sharp and sudden. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. And then warmth, a weight across my legs, a steady, grounding presence pressing against me. Rook, his body close enough that I could feel every breath, every heartbeat. I reached for him blindly, my fingers brushing the soft line of his fur. The panic broke like a wave. My lungs unlocked. My pulse slowed. He stayed there until I drifted back to sleep, unmoving. His body curved around mine like a barrier between me and the ghosts I hadn't yet learned to bury. When morning came, the world felt changed. Brighter, quieter, lighter somehow. I got up, made coffee, watched the mist lift off the fields. Rook lay by the door, eyes following me with that same calm intensity. I smiled at him. "You win, you know. I can't even imagine this place without you now." He blinked, slow and deliberate. I walked over, knelt, and touched his head gently. "You know all my weak spots," I said again, softly this time. "But you don't use them to break me, do you? You use them to keep me here." His eyes caught the morning light. And I swear, for a second, I saw something like understanding flicker there. Something older than language. He didn't move. He didn't have to. Because somehow, I already knew. He wasn't just my protector. He was the part of me that refused to die. And for the first time in my life, that didn't scare me. It made me feel alive. The day after the storm, the world felt washed clean. The sky was wide and endless, the air clear enough that I could see the hills beyond the far field. I stood on the porch, coffee in hand, Rook beside me. The boards were warm beneath my bare feet. For once, there was no restlessness humming inside my ribs, just quiet. Rook leaned into my leg, and I reached down to brush my fingers through his fur. It was softer now, darker, shimmering faintly in the light. He looked up at me with that same knowing calm, the kind that seemed to hold whole sentences without ever speaking a word. "I think I might be okay," I whispered. His tail thumped once against the porch, slow, measured, like punctuation. The truth was, I hadn't felt that in a long time, okay? Not good, not healed, just okay. It was enough. I took a deep breath, the scent of wet earth and pine filling my lungs. The air tasted like beginning. Rook's ears perked up suddenly. He lifted his head, gaze shifting toward the tree line. "What is it?" I murmured, but I didn't expect an answer. He stepped down from the porch and trotted a few paces ahead, stopping where the grass met the gravel drive. His stance was alert but calm. I followed. The breeze tugged lightly at my hair. Somewhere in the distance, a bird cried one sharp, lonely note. When I reached him, he looked back at me, and something in his expression made my chest ache. It wasn't fear. It wasn't warning. It was something like farewell. "No," I said quietly, though I wasn't sure why. "Don't." He blinked slowly, then turned his gaze back toward the horizon. For a moment, we just stood there, me, barefoot and small against the vastness. Him, still and sure like he belonged to something larger than both of us. He didn't move until I said, "Come back." And then he did, returning to my side, brushing his shoulder against my thigh as if to say, "Not yet." We walked back together. But a part of me knew something was shifting. The quiet between us wasn't the same as before. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't haunted. It was final. The next days passed in a blur of small, ordinary things. I fixed the loose latch on the porch door, cleaned the windows, started painting again, nothing elaborate, just soft strokes of color across blank canvases. I hadn't done that in years. Rook would watch from his usual place by the window, his chin resting on the sill, eyes following the light as it moved through the room. Every so often, I'd glance up from my work and find him staring at me. But it wasn't the same look as before, not the one that saw through me or the one that searched for pain. This was gentler, proud almost. It made something behind my ribs flutter. Gratitude, love, fear, all tangled together. At night, I'd fall asleep to the sound of his breathing. Sometimes I'd wake, reach out instinctively, and feel the soft brush of his fur beneath my hand. I never had to look to know he was there. He always was. Until the night he wasn't. It happened quietly. I woke before dawn to a silence so complete it made the air hum. The wind had stopped. The house had gone still. I reached out. Empty. Rook? No sound. I sat up, pulse rising. The blanket slid from my shoulders. The room felt too big, too cold. Rook. Nothing. I stumbled out of bed, bare feet hitting the floorboards hard, heart pounding in my throat. The door to the hallway was open. I ran through the house kitchen, living room, porch. No trace. The field outside was pale with mist, the kind that turns everything into a half-dream. "Rook!" I shouted again, voice cracking. Still nothing, only the whisper of wind moving through the grass. I ran barefoot across the yard, stones biting into my skin, breath ragged. The fog swallowed everything beyond a few meters. And then movement. A shape, dark and still, near the far fence. Rook. I broke into a run. The fog parted, and there he was, standing, facing east, his body outlined by the faintest glow of dawn. When I reached him, I dropped to my knees, hands trembling as I reached for him. "Don't scare me like that," I whispered. He turned his head slightly, meeting my gaze. And in that moment, I knew he wasn't lost. He hadn't run away. He'd come here for a reason. He looked at me the way he always did, calm, endless, certain. Then he looked past me, toward the rising sun. The first light of morning spilled over the fields, soft and golden. It touched the edges of his fur, his face, his eyes. And then, slowly, he stepped closer, pressed his head against my chest, stayed there for a long time, long enough that I could feel the steady beat of his heart against mine. I held him tightly, burying my fingers in his coat. "Don't leave me," I whispered. "Please." He exhaled, deep and even, the same way he had that very first night. When I let go, he stepped back, just far enough that I couldn't reach him. He turned again toward the sunrise, and with one final glance, one that said everything words never could, he walked into the mist. I stood there, frozen, the wind rising around me, carrying the scent of rain and earth. His shape faded slowly until it was gone. Gone. I don't remember how long I stood there. Long enough for the sun to climb higher, long enough for the chill to sink deep into my skin. When I finally went back inside, the house felt different, not empty, just quiet in a way that felt complete. I found his collar by the door, a simple strip of worn leather I didn't remember ever putting there. I picked it up, thumb brushing over the rough edge. It was warm. For days, I kept expecting to see him at the window, by the porch, in the fields. But the house stayed still. The air stayed calm. The first few nights without him were unbearable. The silence pressed against me like a weight. I kept turning to speak, to reach, to listen for that quiet breathing that had become my anchor. But he was gone. And yet he wasn't. Because every time I reached for my mug, I caught myself smiling at the thought of him sitting nearby, head tilted. Every time I opened the door in the morning, I half expected to feel the brush of fur against my leg. The ache didn't go away. It changed shape, became something else. It became understanding. He hadn't left because he wanted to. He left because I no longer needed him to stay. It took me weeks to accept that, maybe months. Time blurred. The house that once felt like a refuge slowly turned into a home. I painted again, wrote, laughed at nothing, slept through the night. Sometimes I'd walk to the edge of the field at dawn, stand where he had stood, and watch the light crawl across the grass. I never called his name anymore. I didn't need to. Because in the silence, I could still feel him, the echo of his breath, the memory of his weight against me, the steady rhythm that had once kept me tethered to the world. He had known all my weak spots. He had touched every scar, every fear, every wound. But he hadn't used them to keep me small. He'd used them to remind me I could survive them. It was a strange kind of love, the kind that didn't ask for anything in return. The kind that demanded only presence, honesty, patience. I used to think love was loud declarations, promises, passion, but now I knew it could be silent too. A heartbeat against your ribs, a warm body at your side, a look that tells you, I see you, all of you, and I'm still here. Months passed, the seasons shifted, the fields turned green, then gold, then bare again. Sometimes I'd see other dogs when I walked into town, wagging tails, eager eyes, playful energy. None of them were Rook. None of them needed to be. He wasn't a pet. He wasn't a savior. He was a mirror. And through him, I had learned to stop running from myself. One morning, I woke before dawn. I hadn't done that in a long time. The sky outside was soft, muted, the kind of gray that holds a promise of light. I made coffee, wrapped myself in a blanket, and stepped out onto the porch. The air was cold. My breath came out in small clouds. I watched the horizon slowly brighten, the mist lifting in gentle waves. And there, just for a moment, I saw him. A dark shape near the far fence, standing exactly where he had been that morning he left. My heart skipped. I blinked, and he was gone. But the warmth stayed deep in my chest, steady and alive. I know, I whispered into the wind. You're still here. The words didn't echo, they didn't need to. I sat on the porch until the sun broke through the clouds, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anything. Not for a knock at the door, not for footsteps on the floor. Just the day, just myself. The world had changed quietly while I wasn't looking. The silence I once feared had become a friend. The solitude, a kind of peace. Rook had taught me that love isn't always about holding on. Sometimes it's about learning when to let something walk away and still carry it with you. He'd known every weak spot, every fracture line, and somehow, through them, he had built a bridge back to the person I used to be. The one who wasn't afraid to feel. The one who could look at her own reflection and not flinch. The one who could stand barefoot in the morning light and whisper thank you to a ghost that still lived in the wind. That evening, as the sun fell low and the sky turned copper, I found myself back at the fence line. The air was warm, sweet with the scent of grass and distant rain. I stood there, hand resting on the worn wood, staring into the horizon where the field met the forest. "Goodbye," I said softly. And then, after a pause, "Thank you." A breeze moved through the grass, bending it in slow, graceful waves. For a heartbeat, I swore I heard it, the faint sound of paws moving through the field, the soft exhale of breath close by. I closed my eyes, smiled. Let the sound pass through me like music. When I opened them again, the field was empty. But the feeling remained, that quiet certainty that I was no longer lost. I turned back toward the house. The porch light glowed faintly through the mist, a warm beacon against the fading dusk. As I walked, the ground felt solid beneath my feet. My steps were light, sure. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and paint and something faintly floral like renewal. I placed the old collar on the mantel above the fireplace. It caught the last bit of sunlight, glinting softly. Then I sat down in the armchair by the window, watching as the day gave way to night. The first stars appeared, sharp and fragile in the darkening sky. And in their reflection on the glass, for the briefest moment, I thought I saw him, those same amber eyes, steady and familiar, looking back at me with quiet pride. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. Instead, I whispered, "I'm okay now." The wind outside stirred gently, brushing against the house like a sigh. And somewhere deep inside, I felt it, that steady, grounding presence, not beside me this time, but within me. Rook hadn't really gone anywhere. He'd simply become part of me, the part that listens instead of runs, that stays instead of hides, that loves without fear. The night settled, the stars burned brighter, and I sat there in the quiet, breathing, alive, whole. He had known all my weak spots. He had touched every wound. And somehow, through it all, he had made me strong. The world outside was vast and silent. The wind whispered through the fields. And for the first time, I whispered back,